never done a movie review or talked about a movie on this channel before, and I know there's probably nothing more bugman than to go on YouTube complaining about Disney Star Wars. But having watched this movie yesterday, there was something particularly cynical and worthy of disdain that I do feel is worth talking about, that really goes deeper than the movie itself. But I mean, as regards the latest installment of Star Wars, it really is a bad movie. I mean, firstly, there are a multitude of very evident plot holes. You know, I'm not the kind of person to look for those, but they're there for all to see. And I'm sure if you go through YouTube, you'll find people that have picked out hundreds of them, and some of them really divert your attention and take away from the realism, or what realism there could be in the Star Wars universe. But that's not a huge problem to me. The problem with this movie is that I went into this movie not caring about any of the characters, and I left still not caring about them. And it's the whole story of this Star Wars trilogy, and why people have revolted so much against it is it's just bad storytelling. No one wants a action figure of Rey or Finn. Everyone wanted one of Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, and the reason that those characters appeal to people is because they had character. You can describe Han Solo or Luke Skywalker by their character alone, and you can get a lot of words out of that, but try and describe Rey or Finn. I mean, up to watching this movie, I still often forgot their names, and there's the black guy, there's the Asian, who I didn't know her name until the end of this movie. I still don't know the pilot guy's name, and that's because they're not compelling characters. And not only are they bad characters, but there's bad storytelling. The worst thing for me was it's basically impossible to get invested in this movie, because time and time again, J.J. Abrams will kill off a character, and you're meant to have an emotional moment of a long-time character finally dying before your eyes, only for 5 minutes later he's back in the scene perfectly okay, and sometimes it's not even explained. It's like, oh, he must have been in another ship, and basically the audience are treated like fools for having had the slightest bit of investment in this movie 5 minutes earlier. And so at a certain point, by the end of the movie, the last scene where one of the main characters is supposedly killed, no one would be silly enough to get upset about that, because at this point you have to just expect he's going to be back 5 minutes later. And lo and behold, he is. And what happens when he comes back 5 minutes later? Well, another main character is dead, only for he rises them from the dead. So at this point, and I could sense this in the movie theater, no one is really invested in these characters. No one is really invested in the story. They're just here to see how this trilogy ends, or they've brought the kids to just have an enjoyable outing. But there's no craft. There's no attempt at anything beyond just producing product. And maybe it's fitting that I watched this movie on the last day of the 2010s, because in a sense this movie seems like, that's why I make a video about it, because this is more than a cynical movie. This is like the completion of a transition from movies as art to movies as pure product. Now, you can say that they've always been that, and throughout the last decade or two, you can look at any movie and say that this is product. This is made by marketing executives or whatever. But there's a degree of creative freedom that remains, that allows there to be something worthwhile in there. It's still possible to tell a story within that. But what we get with the new Star Wars trilogy is movie as pure product. And that this happened to Star Wars is significant, because we know George Lucas based his original Star Wars story and most of the characters around the monomyth. He was inspired by Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, which outlined how basically every ancient mythology was just another telling of this monomyth that appealed to these archetypes within our subconscious, and appealed to these eternal things that always will resonate with people in any time, in any culture. And so George Lucas did the modern telling of the monomyth, and it's no surprise that these characters and the story has resonated so deeply with people that watched the original Star Wars trilogy. And then you move to the new trilogy, and what happens? Instead of having a character like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is created out of the eternal archetype of the wise sage, you have Finn, who is created out of the need to have a black character to be more diverse. Instead of having Luke Skywalker, who fulfills the archetypal role of the hero, an archetypal role that is part of every myth told throughout all of these ancient cultures that Joseph Campbell studied. Instead of that, you have Rey, who is the character because they wanted to have a strong female character in the lead for diversity. And of course, she's stronger than every Jedi that came before her, and she doesn't have any of the weaknesses or self-doubt or problems that other male characters would have, because again they have to have a strong female character. So what happens is, instead of building your story around around the eternal, around these archetypes, around the monomyth, around things that resonate with people on a deep level, and around something that is at its core sort of anti-materialistic, instead of that, you can just feel throughout this movie that every decision has been made by a board of executives. Everything there is for marketing purposes. It's to maximize revenue. And I would say, even if you went into this movie knowing nothing about the politics, knowing nothing about the people behind it, that you would still sense that. Apparently Disney had very low sales of the action figures of the main characters. And that just makes complete sense because, even as a young child, the Star Wars movies resonated with me, and it wasn't because of the lightsaber fights. It wasn't because of the action sequences. It was because it was, I think, a recognition of the monomyth within it. And I think even children could intuit watching this movie that there is an inauthentic aspect to it. I think even children would recognize that this is something that's not worthy of investment, that these characters are inauthentic characters. I mean, you look at the cast and it's entirely chosen by basically diversity quotas, and even the plot, when Disney did try and insert their own kind of twisted universalist idealism into the movie and create the story arcs that ended with Rose and Finn, the Asian and black characters having a kissing scene at the end of the second part of the trilogy, that's completely abandoned in this movie. They don't even interact, they never even talk in this movie. And that's clearly to appeal to the Chinese market. So even when Disney do try and insert their own twisted idealism into their product, if that conflicts with the profit margins, if that conflicts with marketing, they'll just take that out. And some of this cynicism is just so clear. It's nothing but cynicism. In one of the final scenes, they have a lesbian kissing scene, and it's not there for any reason other than to have it there. It's there for 2 seconds, and it's even put in a way that it can easily be edited out for the Chinese market. So, that to me just captures the whole essence of this movie, which is that they're trying to insert their twisted universalist idealism, their esoteric moralization. And at the same time, they'll only do it in such a way that they can still tweak it to maximize their profit margins. And that's how you feel every decision in this movie has been taken. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the storytelling is so bad. I don't think it's any coincidence that J.J. Abrams is unable to tell a story like George Lucas. And, look into J.J. Abrams' background, and maybe it tells you something. Maybe it tells you about the clash of styles here, and maybe it tells you that it's no coincidence that with the people we have running Hollywood now, the plutocrats, and their composition that dominate Hollywood, that they can't produce anything original now, and that it's all this simulacra. Another Marvel movie, another DC movie, another remake, another reboot of Ghostbusters, another movie from a popular book or comic book, a sequel to a movie that was last out 30 years ago. We keep seeing this. And it is this lack of idealism, it's just this absolute cynicism and materialism that is just deadening to creativity. It's impossible to get invested in this movie because it wants to be all things to all people. It wants to appeal to woke capitalism, it wants to do its bit for progressivism, but it doesn't want to upset the Chinese, so it wants to also appeal to the Chinese market and not go too hot and heavy with the progressive stuff. It wants to appeal to as many people as possible and be a big box office success by having heavy action sequences and a simple plot, and at the same time it doesn't want to alienate its louder, more hardcore audience, so it gives them Han Solo, it gives them Luke Skywalker, it gives them the Emperor Palpatine, it gives them lots of little reminders of when they liked Star Wars when they were children, and even that is pure cynicism, and that's probably something we'll see more as Hollywood continues to look back to the 80s and 90s for new stories to tell. I mean, look at the list of upcoming movies for the next few years, and 90% of them are reboots and remakes. And I think there'll be more and more of an appeal to this bugman culture, these people that do nothing but consume product and build their lives around their product consumption. And maybe the bugmen will be kept happy by this. I'm sure they'll find a way to appeal to them, but what that's missing, what even the Bugman is missing, is that he got invested in these stories, these characters, because they were something more than pure product. And so something like Star Wars, at a time when religion was on the decline, took on a religious aspect for these people as adolescents. And now they're grasping at that, they're trying to reach back to those religious archetypes, and Disney aren't capable of offering them anything except this material, cynical reproduction of the simulacra of what had meaning to them. And so they can't be anything other than cynical and disappointed. And sometimes you see them and they've such passionate hatred for these movies, but they can't quite explain it. They can't quite put their finger on what it is. And I think the main thing is just the feeling you get throughout these movies that it's completely inauthentic. Like, watching the last scenes of these movies, I was thinking, this could have been a great scene. This could have been a great movie if I cared a jot about any of these characters. But I went in not caring about these characters because, again, they've been chosen in a boardroom. They don't really have any storytelling capacity. They're just roles to be filled. They're just the black guy. They're just the woman. The Asian, and you just feel that inauthenticity. And then, by the time where J.J. Abrams is trying to give you a huge payoff at the end, and he literally raises the stakes, they couldn't be any higher, the whole universe is at stake, it's the final battle of the Sith and the Jedi, and no one cares. No one cares because, and this is really the fundamental point, no one cares because people loved the original Star Wars and resonated with it because, the action sequences and the lightsabers were secondary. And George Lucas understood that there are eternal things that resonate with people, and there is some kind of archetypal beauty to be reached at, and he reached at that in a storytelling capacity. And then the lightsabers and all the rest of it were just the modern form of that. Whereas Disney, the cynics at Disney, the kind of people that run Disney, they see the world purely in this materialistic and framing way. They look at something like Star Wars and they mistakenly think that it appealed because it had lightsabers and it had stormtroopers and it had big spaceships. And so they say, we'll make the lightsabers look cooler, we'll make the spaceships bigger, we'll add 3D and more CGI. But it doesn't work because they're constructing the characters and the story secondarily around the product. Whereas for Lucas, the characters, the story came first and the product was second. And so Star Wars to me is Star Wars' derisive product because this is the perfect example of a movie that is just pure product and there's nothing else there. It's product, it's marketing, it's diversity quotas, it's all of these things, and then at the end of all of this, you feel they come up with a storyline and they come up with dialogue just to sort of match these requirements and fill in these blanks. But it's all coming from this completely inauthentic way of seeing cinema. And there's no art in this. There's no art in any of these modern blockbusters. This is a movie of pure product. And in a sense, it seems fitting that this was done to Star Wars, because Star Wars was openly a retelling of the monomyth that you see in the space of 30, 40 years now, that Star Wars, which was, there's something very Aryan, there's something very European about that, about a filmmaker creating his own space, creating his own universe, and imposing his will on it, and using it to interact with these eternal archetypes, and to inspire something deeper in people. And think of the symbolism of that out of that then come these merchants, these capitalists who just buy it off him, and out of the remnants of that, they try and recreate it, but because they fundamentally don't understand those things, they approach it in this completely materialist way, and all they can produce is a copy, a poor copy, a simulacra that looks better, that feels better, that is far more flashy and on paper should be far more appealing than the originals. But for all their money, for all their marketing, for all their market research, for all the experts that worked on this, they can't match the vision and the understanding of one man telling a story with a fraction of the budget. So, alright, I'll leave it there. If you're considering watching Star Wars, I'd give it a miss.